Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's weekly Forex forecast. Hope you're having a great weekend. Last week we looked at DXY and Swiss franc long trades, and the DXY really went nowhere last week. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days of just contraction, a real lack of volatility, and this was in fact an inside week. But the Swiss franc trades we looked at, or the Swiss franc setups we looked at, really outperformed, and they were fantastic markets to be involved with last week. Coming into this week, one final thing to note is that it's the last week of the quarter, and the last week of the quarter often sees profit taking, it sees end of quarter rebalancing. So just bear that in mind going into next week. I wouldn't take too many trades because you can get unexpected moves in the markets at the end of the quarter. So I will be trading next week, but I won't be going too crazy. So if we start just with a quick look at the economic calendar, we can see there is not too much going on that we need to pay attention to. There is data coming out, consumer confidence, of course, important data. The main thing really next week is the meeting between the various central bank governors, and they're giving speeches. And as you can see, this is in the ECB forum on central banking, but it's not really anything we need to plan around or factor into our trading plan for next week. Just bear in mind that taking place, so if you see some volatility around that time, you know why. We have some inflation data. Again, this is all kind of important, ISM manufacturing, but not anything in terms of short-term opportunities for next week. And if we jump ahead, you can see we do have an interest rate decision out of Australia the following week, and we also have non-farm payroll. So bear that in mind if you're trading the Aussie pairs, and we're going to look at Aussie setups in today's video. We do have an interest rate decision sometimes the week beforehand. You can see the market's kind of corrective in those currency pairs. So if the Aussie pairs go nowhere, you know what the markets are waiting for. But I am still interested in trading Aussie pairs next week. So it's really just something to note. Okay, so let's have a look at the scorecards going into this week. And last week, as I said earlier, we were looking at US dollar long plays and Swiss franc long plays. The US dollar didn't really go anywhere. They just moved sideways. And the Swiss franc positions really did outperform. In fact, you can see coming into this week, the Swiss franc score has jumped by 2 points. And Swiss franc long positions are my preferred play heading into this week. The second thing to note is that the US dollar actually reduced its score by 1. And the euro has also increased its score. So as I've said many times in these videos, when you see the US dollar and the euro either both on the strong side of the scorecards or both on the weak side together, this tends to mean markets overall are corrective and market opportunities are drying up. And conversely, when you see the US dollar really outperforming on one side and the euro really underperforming on the other side, markets across the board tend to offer more opportunities. So heading into this week, we have two things, which means I'm going to be restricting my trading, really just looking for the best setups. One is the fact that both the euro and the US dollar are scoring the same, meaning that opportunities in the markets are currently contracting. And so this is not the time right now to be taking lots and lots of risk. And also we have the end of the quarter coming up next week, as I said earlier in the video. So Swiss franc long plays are my number one priority heading into next week, especially Swiss franc yen to the upside. I'm also interested in Aussie franc to the downside. We'll also be looking at New Zealand franc to the downside and also pound franc to the downside. And because the euro and the dollar are both scoring 2, and it's difficult to know which one will outperform next week, seeing as they're essentially, the scorecards are telling us we should give them an equal weighting to the upside. What we're going to do is we're going to look at US dollar and euro pairs as well, and then you actually have a full suite of markets which you can look to trade. So if the US dollar outperforms, you can look for opportunities in that market, and if the euro starts to outperform vis-a-vis the Aussie or the yen, you can also look to trade those, and we're going to look at those markets. So we're also going to look at, aside from the franc pairs in today's video, we're going to look at US dollar yen to the upside, also going to look at Aussie dollar to the downside. We'll look at New Zealand dollar and also pound dollar to the downside, and we're also going to look at the euro pairs in terms of euro yen to the upside, euro Aussie to the upside, euro New Zealand to the upside, and also euro pound to the upside. Okay, so let's have a look at the individual currencies themselves, starting with the dollar index. And if you look down here, you can see, yes, the Swiss franc pairs are going to be my preferred play next week. I do still favor overall the US dollar pairs over the euro pairs, and the reason is because of this. If you look at the bigger picture, we are still trending to the upside in the bigger picture in the dollar, and we are above the major breakout level of the 102.992. So I do have more of a bullish bias overall on the dollar, even though we're giving them an equal weighting in the scorecards, or the data is giving them an equal weighting in the scorecards this week. So not much going on last week. In the DXY, we just contracted. This was an inside week, and I am now looking for US dollar index to continue to the upside. Next is the euro. Again, really didn't do much, just contracted last week. So everything we looked at in last week's video in terms of the euro is pretty much still intact. We started to pull back. This is a bear flag, and I am looking further declines down towards the 1.02960. Next is the pound. Now the pound is pretty much the same story. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 completely corrected last week, basically went nowhere in and of itself, and this was because of the contraction in the dollar index. So again, everything we looked at last week is still valid, and I'm just simply viewing this as a correction for further declines to the 1.1734. Next is the Swiss franc. Now the Swiss franc has actually reversed higher, and we've started to trade to the upside here. So any pullback in the Swiss franc next week, I'm going to look for a little correction first, is viewed as an opportunity to look for long positions into the 1.06250. Now, of course, I won't be trading the Swiss franc itself, but any move up in the Swiss franc will result in strength in these pairs, which we're going to look at. Next is the Japanese yen. We took out the target last week, and the Japanese yen is in real trouble here, because if we zoom out, you can see the target that we had last week, and the 0.0079450 was the major breakout here of the head and shoulders. In fact, I need to go a little bit higher. So if I zoom out here on the monthly chart, you can see the major break which this gold level is indicative of, and that's the 0.0079450. That was the major head and shoulders break, and last week we took out this low down here. So as it currently stands, it doesn't get much more bearish than this. Who knows where the Japanese yen is going to go, but if the BOJ continue to defend the 0.25 yield on Japanese government bonds, they are going to continue to devalue the yen, and not only is this extremely fundamentally bearish for the yen, but we are now getting multiple major breaks to the downside in the yen. Next is the CAD. Now again, the CAD really didn't go anywhere, so no real change in the technicals here from last week. I am overall looking for further declines, and generally speaking, I don't think the Canadian dollar pairs are the best markets to be trading next week. Next is Aussie dollar. Now we do have the interest rate decision coming up in a couple of weeks, but we are, as it currently stands, posting a right shoulder, and we've sold off quite strongly. Again, this didn't go anywhere last week because of the DXY, but if the DXY is going to continue higher, as looks most likely, then I would be looking for the Australian dollar, especially as this is the most exposed to the US dollar. That means when the US dollar strengthens, the Aussie dollar tends to be the market which falls the most, and when the DXY falls, the Aussie dollar tends to be the market which appreciates the most. Now, it doesn't always happen, of course, especially in a stagflationary scenario, as we've seen recently, where the Australian dollar has benefited from high commodity prices. We did see the dollar rising, and in fact, the Aussie was rising alongside it. So I'm just talking about, generally speaking, as a rule of thumb. Certainly, if you get a market crash, you will see the Australian dollar suffering generally more than the other currencies. So I am bearish on the Aussie, and if you remember back to the scorecards, the Aussie actually went from neutral last week to -2. We had a change of -2, so we have momentum in the Australian dollar from left to right in the scorecards. It is weakening, and so I do favour Australian shorts heading into this week as some of my preferred plays. And the final currency we're looking at here in and of itself is the New Zealand dollar. We are still trending to the downside again, no change last week with the contraction in the DXY, so I am looking for further declines in New Zealand coming into this week. But I do prefer Aussie and yen shorts over and above New Zealand. So we will be looking at them, New Zealand franc to the downside, New Zealand dollar to the downside, EurNzd to the upside, but I do prefer the Aussie and yen shorts. Okay, so let's have a look at the markets themselves. Going into this week, starting with crude oil. Last week, I was looking for short opportunities into the 103.84, and I mean, we took out the target to the pip. That was the low of the week. Coming into this week, I am still bearish on crude oil, but I'm not super bearish. I'm kind of bearish to neutral. And this pullback here, as it currently stands, is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for further declines. And although the Canadian dollar scored +1 on the scorecards heading into this week, a kind of bullish to neutral score, technically speaking, I think this doesn't bode well for the Canadian pairs next week, and that's one of the reasons why I'm leaving them completely. So any continued pullback in crude oil is viewed as an opportunity to look for shorts into the 98.76. Not one of my favorite markets next week, but it's certainly a market which we can look at opportunities in. Okay, so the first currency market we're going to look at is Franc Yen. This was a market in last week's video and we took out the target at the 140.59. Going into this week, I do like Franc Yen. Any pullback in this market is going to be viewed as an opportunity, and this is my number one pair heading into next week to look for opportunities in. Any pullback, I'm going to be looking for a break higher, and any break higher is going to be the opportunity to look for long positions into the 144.18. Next is Aussie Franc, a really nice market highlighting last week's video. We came down and we took out the target set, almost reaching target 2. Heading into this week, I am looking for short positions once again. It is my second favorite Franc pair. We are quite close to the target, so either I'm going to look for we've started to pull back, so either I'm going to look for continued pullback and then a break and a move into the 0.6587. Or if we come down from here first, take out the target and then bounce, I'm going to be looking down towards target 2, the 0.6539. Next is New Zealand Franc. It's not highlighted as one of my favorite markets heading into next week because I'm restricting my trading a little bit for reasons discussed earlier. But we did come and take out the target and there was really good short opportunity in this market. We opened the week up in this area, really nice sell-off, and this was highlighted last week as a market to keep an eye on for shorts. Heading into this week, we started to correct. Any deeper correction, the deeper the better, as it gives us more risk to reward towards our target. Any pullback is viewed as another opportunity to look for shorts into the 0.5953. Next is Pound Franc. We came down, took out the target almost to the pip last week at the 1.17310. I am looking for shorts heading into this week. Any pullback will be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals. And I'm going to be looking down towards the next key area of support to the downside at the 1.1604. Moving on to the dollar pairs, starting with euro dollar because we cover euro dollar every single week, but you can see euro dollar is very corrective right now, and that's because the DXY and the euro are both very corrective. We had inside weeks. I am on balance looking for this to resolve itself to the downside. We are still below the 1.06359, and we cannot, as we've discussed in previous videos, have any significant rally until the market trades back above the 1.06359. So what I'm going to be looking for heading into next week, I want to see the market here breaking out of this contraction. And if we start to break down here with momentum, that would be the sign to start to look for a pullback, and I'm going to be looking for shorts into the 1.0341. It's not highlighted in gold because it's not one of my favorite plays next week, but if we do get the breakout, I will be looking for shorts in this market. Okay, so US dollar Japanese yen, this is highlighted in gold as one of my favorite plays next week. We started to correct already. Any continued correction is viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish setups. I'm going to be looking up towards the 140.29. Now, this is quite a distance to this target, so we may not get there in 1 week, may take a couple of weeks. If you want a more conservative target for next week, you can look at the 138 handle, which is the psychological level over here. Aussie dollar, we did have the Australian dollar contracting from 0 to -2 in the scores. The US dollar, yet it did come down a little bit from 3 to 2, but it's still bullish. So any continued pullback in this market, I am going to be looking for a break to the downside, and any bearish breakout in this market starts to trade up and then starts to break the lows like this with momentum. I'm going to be looking for shorts into the 0.6812. Next is pound dollar. I am looking for further declines. We had a huge sell-off, and because we had such a volatile move, we have to have an extended period of contraction. That tends to be what happens. Markets can't just keep falling in a straight line forever. So because of this big sell-off, we have started to contract. I am looking for further declines and follow through to the downside. You could probably put this in gold, especially as we have an Australian dollar interest rate decision in a couple of weeks, but I'm going to leave it out. I'm just taking the 6 pairs highlighted here as my preferred plays. But any break to the downside in pound, especially with momentum, look for it to break down like this with momentum and start to correct. That will be the opportunity to look for shorts. First into the previous low over here as a more conservative target, and then onto the 1.1715. Very similar to the previous market, or in fact, not the previous market, but US dollar yen. It's probably going to take a couple of weeks to get here because of the distance. So again, if you want a more conservative target, look for the previous low. Next is New Zealand dollar. We've already started to break out of here with momentum. You can see we broke down with momentum. We've started to flag. So already this is looking like a good opportunity to look for shorts. I would look for one more break to the downside next week in this area, and any pullback will be viewed as an opportunity to look for short positions into the 0.6158. I do still think there's a very good chance we decline in New Zealand dollar, pound dollar, and Aussie dollar next week, so keep an eye on those markets. Okay, so moving on to the yen pairs, starting with euro yen. Last week we took out the target at the 144.210. Heading into this week, you can still, we've already started to pull back, so any continued pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish breakouts into the 145.94. The next euro pair and the final of my top 6 pairs heading into next week, which I'm going to be keeping my eye on, looking for opportunities, is EurAusd. We have started to break to the upside, and you can see at the end of last week we started to contract, so any continued pullback is viewed simply as a correction, an opportunity to look for bullish breakouts into the 1.5514. Next is euro pound. Now euro pound and euro New Zealand are probably my least favorite. You could almost get rid of these. I've left them in purely because of the way the scorecards are setting up, and they're suggesting that the euro has an edge over the pound and the New Zealand. But these two markets here are probably the last two markets I'm going to be focused on out of all of the ones presented here. So heading into next week, you can see this market's kind of choppy. I would like to see the market breaking out, so any continued pullback, I'm going to be looking for momentum to the upside like this, and then any pullback will be viewed as an opportunity to look for longs into the previous high over here at 0.8717. And the final forex pair we're going to look at here is euro New Zealand. I probably like this over and above euro pound, to be honest, just purely based on the technicals, because the pound is very choppy. We started to correct. This is actually a bull flag, and any continued pullback is viewed next week as an opportunity to look for bullish breakout. I'm going to be looking into the 1.7021. Okay, so wrapping up with gold, silver, and Bitcoin. If we start by looking at the gold-silver ratio, we actually have an expanded triangle here. You can see if we just tag the highs and lows here, it's actually expanding. However, it is still grinding to the upside despite this. So I do still favor on balance gold short positions because we have a strong dollar. I don't like to trade silver or gold against the dollar because it's much better to trade those markets with the dollar as a tailwind. In other words, you can be long gold and silver when the dollar is weak, and better to be short gold and silver when the dollar is strong, rather than a headwind and do it in the opposite way, where you have the dollar working against your position. So as it currently stands, I am looking for further advances in the US dollar, so I favor shorts in these markets, and I do favor silver shorts more than gold shorts once again this week. Okay, so if we have a look at gold, gold really went nowhere last week. It was another market which more or less just contracted alongside the DXY. We have formed a head and shoulders here after this correction, and so any continued pullback in this market, I do favor short opportunities. Any breakdown with momentum, I'm going to be looking for a pullback, and I'm going to be looking for shorts into the 1789.28. Next is silver. I favor silver shorts as one of my favorite plays outside these markets next week. Why? Because we are below the 21.45, which is the major breakout level. We do have a strong dollar, and between gold and silver, silver is the weaker of the two markets. So any pullback as we're currently seeing is still viewed as an opportunity to once again look for shorts, and we actually had a decent sell-off previously in silver to the downside. We've been looking at this to the downside for a few weeks. Any continued pullback is viewed as another opportunity to look for shorts into the 20.51. And wrapping up the video with Bitcoin, we have been correcting, again, similar to what we looked at in pound dollar, big sell-off to the downside, which I posted on Twitter and also highlighted in previous weekly Forex Forecast videos in this area to look for shorts, look for a big sell-off capitulation, and that's exactly what happened. Now, because of this, just like pound dollar, we needed to correct. We have been correcting, but I am looking for further declines down to the previous low and onto the 16.492. So any breakout here of this level like this, I'm going to be looking for a pullback, and I'm going to be looking for shorts into the 16.492, and Bitcoin is my final top play that I'm going to be looking at next week. I do really like this market to the downside in the near term. So that is it for me for this week, guys. Remember, we're going into the end of the quarter next week. You can get unexpected moves, so I am going to be looking to trade, but I'm really going to be looking for the best setups, not taking too many trades next week. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know by liking, sharing, and subscribing. A big thank you to everybody who does that on a regular basis, and a big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the channel so far. I want to wish you all a fantastic weekend, and I want to wish you all the best in your trading next week. The only thing left to say is take care, and don't forget to trade safely.